Welcome to Layer 02 of the first serial experiment. Headphones are recommended for participation. Please enjoy.
It has been some time since the rumors of the existence of a processor called Psyche first surfaced. First mentioned in news groups, then eventually throughout the web, its name was whispered among tech otakus, with employees of shops in Akihabara and Nihonbashi at its core. Despite high skepticism as to whether a computer's performance could be so astoundingly enhanced by the mere insertion of this processor into the motherboard, this editorial office has, through a certain route, successfully managed to obtain what it believes to be the processor called Psyche. Here, without further ado, I report the details of our findings. Let me just add that I can in no way reveal the route by which we obtained this processor and can answer no questions on the subject.
Lain is up to something. At this stage, it's hard to tell what, as we only get little glimpses into her actions. She still seems to be hiding a lot from the world around her, and from the viewer in turn. Ironically, Lain's blank-faced silence in response to everyone's questions is its own incrimination. When the police officer tells Lain that she should speak up even if she had nothing to do with it, he doesn't realize that she's being silent precisely because she does have something to do with it, but her deer-in-the-headlights persona gets her out of it.
As observable from its exterior, it is multi-layered in construction. The density of the die area does not look to be particularly high, perhaps due to its being a small lot prototype. What we managed to obtain was only the actual processor itself. There were no documents of any kind. Therefore, a bit of trial and error became necessary for the installation process. As the rumors state, installation involved the seeding of the processor onto the motherboard's 429-pin North Bridge chipset. Therefore, any effort it has would act solely on the motherboard using this chipset. The actual installation itself was not difficult, being similar in method to one for the overdrive accelerator, installed by seeding in a similar manner over the 386 of yore. However, getting the Psyche to operate was another matter.
Lain of the Wired and Lain of the Meat are slowly synchronizing into one whole. It remains difficult to interpret the physical existence of other Lain when the show refuses to show her outright playing that character, but the patrons of Siberia seem more inclined to share some truth with us than Lain herself. At the least, we see Lain actually accessing the Wired in its chaotic glory, and Lain begins to show a more active interest in expanding her knowledge as she learns about and installs the Psyche drive. She hopes to take her father on this journey with her, but he refuses to act as her guide any longer, so she establishes new connections to propel her onwards. By the episode's end, the lines between Lanes are becoming pixelated, with Lane's completely unnatural greeting to her sister seeming to visually degrade into a low-res monitor image.
This processor pushes a 133 MHz base clock up to 400 MHz, interpolating the memory controller at a send rate of 1.6 GB per second. To our surprise, Psyche, intercepting BIOS settings, uses a unique command to take control over the I/O of the entire motherboard itself. Therefore, any jumper settings on the motherboard become nullified. Indeed, this would not only make it possible to raise the clock speed, but also to significantly increase the speed of signals by seemingly routing them for a specific purpose before reaching the I/O. The question is, however, for what purpose? Running of the CPU, FPU, and tasks such as ray tracing at the normal benchmark produced high numbers in every category, but not at an especially remarkable level. It seems that Psyche's true worth only shines through once it has made a network connection.
All of this is set against the backdrop of Lain trying to decide if she should remain in the physical world or fully integrate into the Wired. She hears one voice telling her that death feels amazing, that God exists in the Wired, and that there is nothing left for Lain in this world. However, Lain begins to establish a connection with her classmate Alice, saying her name out loud and committing it to memory for the first time. It's almost as though Lain is clinging to Alice as an excuse to stay in the physical world out of fear for changing over. This all sets the seeds for what will grow in the coming episodes.
In our experimental tests, we confirmed that network broadcasting was carried over with unbelievable efficiency. This Psyche operates at 128 bits for a 12 cache memory, but it is at this point that Psyche, interpreter-like, seems to be translating the network command packet, sending out a response in protocol, increasing the data capacity of the packet and greatly reducing sending time. Furthermore, the particular protocol used seems to incorporate some of the same code included in what is called the next generation TCP/IP, causing things previously invisible to now be seen. While accessing the network on a Psyche installed machine, the computer began to make automatic downloads without the user's consent, rewriting the registry. In addition, what seems to be a type of mailer application became installed, and strange messages began to appear in floating windows. These messages are a revelation from God, and they command me. The prophecy must be fulfilled. The knights of Eastern Calculus shall save my soul, and the software that shall restore humanity to their original form will inhibit the brain's serotonin secretions, taking me to a world without suffering.
Part 1 of Layer 02 is complete. Please insert disk 02 into the disk drive to proceed with Part 2.
What is your name? First year in junior high? Second? Is school fun? What's your favorite subject? Are you in a school club or anything? So you go straight home after school, then? Do you have friends? What kind of games do you play? Then what do you do? About what? Where do you talk? You don't like to talk to them in person? What kind of place do you think the Wyatt is? Those are someone else's words, aren't they? Do you like your father? What Navi do you use to access the Wyatt? Do you like fiddling with computers and things like that? Do you dislike these types of questions? You don't like to talk about yourself? Why? Because? Who told you that? Who? Which God? There's a God in Wyatt? Do you believe that? Answer me. I said, answer. I'm not satisfied with that kind of answer. Yes, that's right. The God of the Wyatt is the supreme God of the real world. Therefore, he controls the world absolutely. Understand?
Lain has changed. The lines between Lain of the Wired and Lain of the Flesh have begun to lose meaning. Lain assures her father that she is still herself, but the definition of herself has already been altered. On an innocent level, Lain seems to have found a passion in her life and is, for the first time, expressing happiness. On a more questionable level, she's becoming powerful and ambitious in the Wired. With a single expression of anger, she can command her Navi to net-hack a headset and blow it off someone's face. She can appear before people in the flesh, even though she is only present in the Wired. Through the use of her Psyche processor, Lain has become very powerful very fast. When I was growing up, I didn't really understand how to communicate with other people. I would just lock up inside my own mind, not really say anything to anyone because I didn't understand how to communicate with them in a way that they would get me. People never seemed to care about the things that I cared about. People never seemed to be interested in what I had to say. When I discovered the internet when I was about 11, I found that it was a place I could find other people who cared about the things I did, who I could talk to and communicate with. And while I was still really bad at communicating online, and I usually pissed people off all the time in my early teens, through meeting people on the internet, I eventually learned how to communicate. I learned how to be better at it. I met a lot of people who helped me out a lot. And now, here I am, almost 23 years old. I still never get out of the house, but now suddenly I'm great at communicating with people. When I go out now, I can talk to anyone just fine. It's not even a problem. You know, by the time I graduated high school, I was still pretty introverted. By the time I finished, or dropped out rather, of college, I was still fairly introverted. But at this point, I'm not anymore. Not really. And I have the sort of shared passion and general welcoming embrace of the internet to thank for all that. To thank for everything, really. Even my career is based on the internet. Lain has found religion in The Wired, and even carries a biblical text to boot. She is seeking God in The Wired, and reaching a sort of omnipresence there along the way. She has transcended the separation of wired and flesh, and brags about how she'll be able to move in both worlds in full range and full motion soon. The Wired and Serial Experiments Lain reminds me a lot of the real-world internet in 2005. It was a period when everyone was aware of the internet, and people knew that it was becoming a big thing, but outside of like Facebook and MySpace, people didn't really get into it. There wasn't a huge push for it until the next few years after that, when it really became this all-encompassing thing. The Wired is still in that moment where people don't consider it part of the real world, or they consider it another separate entity, even though Lain, being ahead of her time, knows that they really are one and the same. In this modern age, I don't think most people would even question it. These days, 1 out of every 5 relationships is formed online. I met my first girlfriend on the internet, and she lived across the country. One of my best friends, my mentor, is a Filipino man who I went and stayed with for an entire month, and all I had known him from was the internet. We don't live in an age where these can be thought of as 2 separate worlds. They are one and the same, and somehow Chiaki Kanaka understood that as early as 1998. This episode also introduces us to the Knights, who are a parallel for early internet trolls and eerily reminiscent of what eventually would become the collective known as Anonymous. I've seen journalistic accounts in the past about how big-time hackers would often claim that they were trying to teach people a lesson about protecting themselves and keeping knowledgeable through their often highly destructive actions. The Knights routing a violent dungeon crawler game into a kids' hide-and-seek game, resulting in the death of a little girl, feels exactly like the kind of thing a pretentious hacker would do to try to send a message. We'll be seeing a lot more of these Knights in the near future, as Lain drags us further and further down the rabbit hole.
This concludes Layer 02 of the first serial experiment. Please turn on automatic updates to be alerted when future software becomes available.